HUAC in this country to save this country. Now, that's one of the most dreaded things I could ever say on this show. What was HUAC, the House of Un-American Activities Committee? Now, all we hear about from Hollywood is that there was a group called the Hollywood 10 who was unfairly picked on. Many of them lost their ability to work in Hollywood. There was a famous movie about it with Zero Mostel, and he was an out-of-luck writer who got caught being affiliated with the Communist Party, and it shows him jumping out of a window. Again, always sympathetic to the communists. That's the way Hollywood has been for a very long time. Well, if you want to invest some time in actually studying HUAC and studying what America really was like during the, quote, Red Scare, there was a lot to be scared about from the Reds. They had penetrated academia. They had penetrated Hollywood. They had penetrated government. How do I know that? Is it just rhetoric? Am I just being a volatile talk show host? Back in the 90s, there was a release of a book called the Venona Papers, Venona. The Venona Papers were transcripts from Russia of ex-Soviets who divulged the exact names of the communists in America who had penetrated those areas of this society. They were working directly and indirectly for Russia at that time, which was Soviet Russia, to undermine the United States of America. The Venona Papers, in other words, confirmed that Senator McCarthy was 100% right and that we needed a HUAC and they needed to root out the subversives in the United States of America. Is there anyone listening to this show who would like to argue with me about whether or not we should bring back HUAC? Because I think we should bring back HUAC. And I've said so kind of comically over the years on this show. But now that I see that a bum, a lying bum like Bernie Sanders, and I can read right through him, I know the type. Remember, I ran from New York to get away from the Bernie Sanders of New York. That type disgusted me. I was a social worker. I was a poor social worker, and I saw this type of bum. I knew who they are. I can literally smell them from a mile away. Bernie Sanders is a con man from the top to the bottom, and he's found millions of stupid people who believe in his lies. But behind him are far more dangerous people like Occasional Cortex and people we haven't even heard of. They are the ones, if ever one of their minions becomes powerful, who would introduce the terror tactics of the Khmer Rouge in the United States of America. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but, you know, this is what happens in a seminar. This is what happens in a graduate program. This is what happens not in a elementary school or junior high school level of talk radio, but in a graduate school course. We have to think backwards, look backwards, think backwards, and then we have to think forward and look forward. And I'm telling you, the genesis of Bernie Sanders and Occasional Cortex has been seen before. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge. In Russia, in Germany, the Red Brigades. Just look up the Red Brigades and you'll know who they are. This old seltzer man is the most dangerous man in American political history.
Michael Savage, a host like no other.
Dr. Zhivago, produced by Carlo Ponti, one of the great films of all time, one of the highest grossing films of all time. My, has Hollywood fallen. Why has the fallen? Now, this movie with Omar Sharif and Julie Christie is based on a novel, Dr. Zhivago, by Boris Pasternak. It was banned in Russia for many, many years. In the Soviet Union, they couldn't even see this movie because it talks about how people were mistreated during the Soviet era. And rather than summarize for you all the scenes in it, I will give you one scene that has stuck with me forever. It came out in the 60s, I think, in 1969 and 1965. And I was a young guy, young teacher. I didn't have any money. But I remember seeing the movie, and something stuck with me forever. It was that after the revolution, Zhivago goes back to the family house, I believe, in Moscow. Yuri returns to his wife, Tonya, son, Sasha, and Alexander, whose house in Moscow has been divided into tenements by the new Soviet government. That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. Now, we have a small version of a Soviet government already operational in America. It came to life during the Kennedy administration. It flowered during the Johnson administration. It flowered greatly during the Civil Rights Movement, and I'll give you all of the lineage of all of this. And you will see that we have the tentacles of a Soviet system already in place in this government. Now, I could throw the name Trump out right now because you could say he was the antithesis to this growing octopus of socialism, and he was, which is why the deep state has and is still trying to destroy him. You must understand that over a 50-year period, a government becomes very entrenched in all aspects of itself. And all aspects of itself reflect the socialism of this government that has been here for a long time. And they didn't want an outsider to come along. They didn't want a businessman. They wanted a politician from a party who was a well-known factor who could be controlled. And along comes this brash New York businessman, Donald Trump, who was a naked capitalist and a rogue to them, and they don't know what to do with him. So they try to smear him for years. It blows up in their face. Then they get their stooge henchmen, Pelosi, Schiff, and the other characters who still try to destroy him because they do want the very same tentacles to have their continuous grip upon America. Now, don't get me wrong. There are many aspects of the Trump administration that are big government. You think I'm naive? You're mistaken. The budget is out of control. It's very much like a socialist government in terms of the budget. I remember I criticized Bush in the second term or the second half of his administration. And I said, wait a minute now. This government under Bush is very much like a socialist government with the crazy spending. But what Bush did in spending is child's play compared to what Trump's administration is doing. They're spending like crazy. Now, I know we don't care because compared to the other side, we're better off, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it all, and we are. I know we are. Obviously, when you look at the other side, anything is better than the other side. But on the other hand, if the man is a fiscal conservative, he's got to start being fiscally conservative. So, again, let's get back to what I'm talking about. Bernie the Bolshevik takes New Hampshire. Now, he wins with 151,000 votes. In the past, he won 70,000. Last night, he won by 70,000. 4 years ago, the communists won by 150,000. It's true there were more people in the race last night, so it's a very hard analysis to make. But there is a trend that you must not ignore. And the trend may not be evident to many of you, but there is a trend in America towards socialism. Whether we want to hear it or don't want to hear it is irrelevant. There is a trend towards it, whatever the reasons may be. And where did this socialism begin? It began in the early 19th century with utopian communities such as the Shakers and the activist visionary Josiah Warren and intentional communities inspired by Charles Fourier. And then in 1877, labor activists. Labor activists, and I'm talking about now in America, immigrants basically from British, German, or Jewish backgrounds founded the Socialist Labor Party in 1877. 1901, the Socialist Party is founded in America. Under Socialist Party of America, presidential candidate Eugene V. Debs led a great opposition to World War I and led the government into a repression collectively known as the First Red Scare. Now, pay attention to the first socialist presidential candidate, Eugene V. Debs. When I grew up in New York, there was a radio station in New York City called the EVB. It may still be on the air, and it was largely an ethnic station, WEVB. I can remember to this day, I used to joke about it. They had shows in different languages, including Yiddish. And my friends and I would listen to it just to mock it. It was so old world and funny. WEVB. And I remember there was jingles like the Joe and Paul song. Joe and Paul are Farganigan, Joe and Paul. I'm just singing a little tune I can remember the jingles to this day. You know, I got to have fun in radio. Did you hear my laugh? That's a belly laugh. It's a real laugh. There's a lot of fake laugh in radio. People fake it like they do fake orgasms. A lot of people fake laughter in radio in order to make you think they're enjoying themselves when they're schwitzing and dying up here. I actually just enjoyed myself. So going back again to what I'm talking about. So in the 50s, well, I'm getting up to the 20s. Here's another big name to remember. In the 20s, the Socialist Party declines. But they ran Norman Thomas for president 6 times in the 20s and 30s. You may remember the name Norman Thomas, right? In the 30s, suddenly the Communist Party USA takes importance in labor and racial struggles. And it suffers a schism which converged in the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party. It's interesting to me that I think that's where Sanders comes in. He's sort of a Trotskyite, by the way. In the 50s, McCarthy comes along, and with UAC and investigations of Hollywood, academia, and government, socialism runs and hides under the rocks. In the 60s, now remember the 60s, you had a lot of radicalization in America, brought about by the New Left and other social struggles and revolts. And Michael Harrington, another name to remember, and other socialists were actually called to work for the Kennedy administration and then the Johnson administration's so-called war on poverty and so-called Great Society. And socialists at that time also were drawn into and played key roles in the civil rights movement. Now, the 70s come along, and you have revolutionary situations in America characterized by black power, allegedly in opposition to the Vietnam War, and you have groups like the Weather Underground appearing, which conduct a campaign of bombings and killings. In San Francisco, we now have a DA whose mother was a member of the Weather Underground, to show you how far they have come. Pay attention to the moving parts here. George Soros is funding all of these Weather Underground types in DA races across America. Remember, the head of the snake, the ACLU. Remember the other head of the other serpent, George Soros, funding groups like these. 1982, the Democratic Socialist of America is formed after a merger between the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee and the New American Movement. And then suddenly in the 80s, anarchists become visible as a result of their activities. And so now we move up to 08. The DSA, what's the DSA? The Democratic Socialists of America. There was a party, there is a party. Supports who? Barack Obama. Did you know this? Bernie Sanders is the new candidate of the Democratic Socialists of America. He has revived the lineage of this toxic socialist movement and has brought it into the mainstream in this presidential election. And now you know the rest of the story. Again, this is Michael Savage, where I'm running the School of Advanced Political Science, where everyone gets an A. I'm not asking you to remember all those names because it's impossible to do so. All you have to remember is that Bernie Sanders did not appear out of nowhere. Bernie Sanders is the most current in a long line of revolutionaries in American politics. It is a growing movement in America. Now, if he should get the nomination, and yesterday I predicted he's not going to cross the finish line, and I guess I should give you a summary of that podcast now. I mean, you could pick it up on Michael Savage's podcast, which is probably one of the most important podcasts in the world right now. Whether you want to accept it or not is almost irrelevant to me. All I know is I produce quality products. Whether you accept it or not or buy them or not is up to you, not up to me. I can only produce the fine product. It's up to you to consume it. Yesterday's podcast has several elements in it, which includes my prediction that Bernie Sanders will not cross the finish line. Now, why did I say that? Now, I don't mean the finish line of the campaign. He will probably finish the campaign. He's got such an animus in him that the heart attack will not stop him. The hatred for America, the hatred for the white man, is so strong in Bernie Sanders that it literally impels him through all of his infirmities. So we now look at what he's doing. And why do I say he won't cross the finish line? Because the power structure that runs the Democrat Party is virtually no different than the power structure that runs the Republican